Welcome to The Bold Book of the Day with Dr. Denise Nicholson, a show that is a central hub and safe space for authors to share their stories. The Bold Book with Dr. Denise begins now.
Welcome to the Bold Book of the Day podcast. My name is Dr. Denise Nicholson, and this podcast is for anyone looking for inspiration. Today, I have the pleasure of talking to Wendy Horwitz. She has a beautiful written exploration of how rituals shape our lives. So, welcome, Wendy.
Thank you, Denise. I'm very happy to be here.
I'm glad we finally got here. Took us a little bit of challenge just to get through here, but we're here. Wendy is the author of Milkweed and Honey Cake. Ooh, it sounds so good. But it's a memoir in ritual moments. Please tell us a little bit more about why was it important for you to write this book?
Okay, so we'll talk, I assume, a little more about what we mean by ritual, but I found that there were the momentous occasions, the losses, the big celebrations like graduations and weddings and memorials, and then events in the world where we feel that the world is broken. And I find myself responding to these by drawing on old rituals, traditional rituals from my own background, which is Jewish, but also with creativity. I think that we can create small rituals, even in our daily lives, to contend with those big events, but then with the small transitions. So, for example, watching children grow up, watching our parents age, watching ourselves change through relationships, through family transitions. I feel human beings yearn for a way to shape, to make meaning of those changes, of those large events, and of the small, lovely events that happen to us. So I found myself writing about this a lot. I am a writer, so I'm writing these essays and I look at them and I go, wow, there's a theme here, which is ritual. I have to confess to you, if you don't mind my saying, this started out as a travel book. I like to write travel essays. And then I started to put it together and I realized, wait a minute, it's about something else. It's a different kind of journey. It's a journey more of what people might say of the spirit, even though sometimes I was in other countries, sometimes I was, traveling around North America. So once I realized that ritual was really the central theme, I started to notice those events through our lives, through the pandemic, through my children's graduations, through weddings that occur in unusual circumstances. And then, as I said, through those small moments and special places in your community and in your home that are opportunities for ritual.
Was there a particular thing or a moment that you experienced that sparked the idea of this memoir?
Yes, it was really, as I said, as I started to work on it as a travel memoir, and I looked at one of the essays, which was about traveling in Costa Rica many years ago during the spring holiday that's coming up of Passover, and being really bereft, essentially, that I couldn't celebrate it. I tried very hard. And I was reworking that essay to be sort of adventurous woman does solo travel kind of thing. And I thought, this isn't about that. This is about the yearning for that ritual that I couldn't have. So I think it was really that moment at my desk,
Yeah.
working it through when I was going, whoa, this is something else. And then I started to look at my other notes, other essays, and lived my life and saw these opportunities to write about that as time moved forward.
So I see you write about celebration and loss. How do rituals help us to get through and navigate both joyful and painful moments?
Okay. So when I talk about celebrations, I I want to say that I serve tradition with a twist. Okay. So I describe some traditional, you would recognize, a wedding, but I like to frame it in different ways. I like to think of things as journeys. I like to look for concrete manifestations of rituals. So I talk about even how we set a table for an event. You can serve pizza, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Soda, but taking out a special plate, taking out putting some flowers perhaps on the table. So in the celebratory moments, I think in terms of making that even more beautiful, of framing it as something that perhaps is rooted in one's tradition, but even if it isn't, of making it more beautiful. As for the more difficult occasions, the losses, I draw on my own traditions. So for example, I have a chapter in the book about the loss of my father, which was now 9 years ago. And I describe the mourning process in Judaism, which is very robust. It marks the time through a week, then through 30 days, then through 11 months, and then annually. But even if that is not your tradition, even if you find yourself during loss kind of wondering, well, what do we do? What do we do? Which I think some people do flounder if they don't have that tradition. I think of something as simple as lighting a candle.
Mm-hmm.
One can take the very simple act and render the moment more meaningful, render the moment in community, reaching out to others. And I think that combination of a concrete sensory act, like a candle, or like smelling spices, for example,
Mm-hmm.
out the beautiful plate of your grandmother's to use, and reaching out to community are some of the ways that I feel, at least I have contended with those more challenging events.
So I guess that's how everyday objects kind of shape our experiences and shape the ritual that we create in, just the little details. I noticed that your memoir has a lot of rich sensory details, like the scent of an old cupboard and or opening the process of opening a pomegranate. So now, did you find that because your culture your culture is rich with rituals, that you wanted to bring that into your home and teach your generation or the next generation to also have not just the rituals but the reasoning behind the rituals?
So, yes, and
Mm-hmm.
definitely feel a sense of legacy. And I'm going to tell you two examples and then the and. Okay. So the legacy is as follows. I'm going to tell a very short story, which, by the way, is not in the book, but it represents the kind of story I tell.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was a little kid, very little, 5 years old, we moved into a new house. It was a bigger house for the growing family. I had 3 siblings.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a photograph from that time of me as a little kid with my mom steadying my hand, lighting the Hanukkah Menorah. At Hanukkah, we celebrate for 8 days, we light candles. And it's a lovely little scene. But it's such an old photo. Some of your viewers and listeners may be as old as me to remember this, that it's an actual photo. And on the back is the date that it was printed.
Mm-hmm.
And we moved, I realized, on November 22nd, 1963, which was the day that President John F. Kennedy was assassinated.
Mm.
And my mother dug out that menorah from the crates, the moving crates, with 4 little kids under the age of 8, and made this celebration. So at one of the most challenging times in our world, she lit had us light these candles and made a feast for us. So I see that photo and I think what I have done is pass that on to my children and draw on those traditions as well. The second story I will tell, though, is the and, which is that it's not just religious tradition. It's the sometimes stumbling upon something that just begs for a ritual. So when my son was little, he's now in his 20s, I watched him board the yellow school bus for the first time. And I watched him go up those steps, and I thought, this isn't just dropping the kid at daycare, which is hard, but you get over it. It felt he was taking his first step into independence. And so it's not just a psychological matter for me. Resonance with that calls for the human being universally, I think, to mark it somehow. What is the ritual for climbing the yellow school bus for the first time, or traveling for the first time? What is that ritual? And I explore in my book both those legacy kinds of rituals from my culture and my religion, and these ones that I think are kind of the human universal. And then what do you do with it? What do you pass on? I am delighted when my children call me or text me asking about a recipe. You said when you announced the title of the book, ooh, honey cake, that sounds yummy. When they call me for a holiday recipe, I'm delighted because that baking, that cooking for the holidays, my grandmother's recipes, and passing them on to my kids and having them do that becomes a kind of ritual. You are recreating your grandmother's words, which were very vague, kind of handful of this or a smidgen of, like, what did that mean? You recreate that. You kind of conjure their words and their spirit and their love in that process. And that to me becomes a ritual. It's not just downloading a recipe, which is lovely. I do that frequently. It's my grandmother's, then passed on to my kids. So that's not so much sort of traditional in a way, but it becomes ritualized.
So I have a tradition, I don't know if it's a ritual, it could be, where I make Christmas cake from my grandmother's recipe. So it's a Jamaican black cake, and it's the only time that I make the cake. It's served at weddings and it's served at birthday parties, but I remember it being made at Christmas time to celebrate. And so when I wanted to learn this tradition, I only wanted to do it at this time of the year because of the memories that it brought back for me. And I don't know if I've made it into a ritual. What do you think creates a tradition or makes the difference between a tradition and a ritual?
It's a fantastic question, and one that I have wrestled with, and that I don't know that I get the definitive answer in my essays, in my book, but I love the image of the cake. You got to send me that recipe. So I think you have actually offered some hints to it. You said you only make it at Christmas. It evokes the memory. You presumably, because, those recipes weren't exact, what is that taste that you are going for? It's a taste of memory. It's also, I feel like it's honoring our foremothers. What did they leave us? My grandmothers were, they raised children, they cooked, they had a household. They did later in life work outside the home. But what did they leave us? I don't know about your grandmother, but mostly what they left us was a couple silver teaspoons, maybe, and a lot of recipes. So it becomes ritual to me, as you have actually defined it yourself, by it is one time a year. You're not saying, oh, it's Thursday night, I think I'll make that cake.
Right.
With like, oh, I'll just throw that together. I'm, having friends over for coffee. I think I'll throw it together. It's at a particular time. It's a place. You are in a particular mode. Now, there's a gray area, right, between tradition and ritual. I think some of them are repeated. There are also novel rituals, though, things that we only do once. And I describe some of those in the book. But the ones from tradition, I think it's the intention, the mentality that you have going into it. What is the spirit that you're doing it in? What is the context?
Yes.
And I'm not an anthropologist, so I can't tell you like the actual definition of that. But I do think that intention and context and spirit of it renders it a ritual, at least from my point of view.
I agree, because it is also my intention that my children like this experience so much that they want to start this kind of tradition and ritual in their family, meaning it's the tradition to eat the black cake, but it's a ritual for us to do it and have dinner together. And I send one for my son that lives nearby, and one for my other son that doesn't live nearby, and one for my daughter. Like, I make sure that it is something that they get to enjoy. So I guess it's a ritual because of my intent. Now, should we respect other people's ritual based on how we feel about our own rituals and traditions?
I have spent a good deal of time writing and thinking and talking about what I think of as boundaries around ritual communities, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
Some of these can be shared. So the example I mentioned, that the holiday of Passover is coming up, and we have a special ritual dinner. It is quite ritualized. Every food means something in the Exodus story. And we often invite guests from all sorts of backgrounds. And so they are invited to partake in that and share the story and the songs and the prayers and the food with us. I think that's very different. I've invited the person to my table. I love that. I love sharing it with people, and people are curious, and it's a lot of fun to have people there. They ask really great questions, and it raises good discussion. Very different from entering a space that you haven't necessarily been invited into. Now, people can debate this. So I have a chapter in the book that was probably one of the most difficult to write, and I had many people look at it before I even included it in the book. And it's about a time that I took with a colleague, our college students, on a service learning trip to a Native American reservation in the West. And when we were out there, it was service learning, so we were providing service. They were incredibly gracious hosts and fed us and, taught us a lot of different things about the tribal customs and art and all this wonderful stuff. They also invited us into one of their ceremonies, and some of my students didn't want to participate. I wrestled with it because I thought, ooh, here I am, going into this. There's such a history in this country in terms of Native Americans, in terms of tribal peoples. And what does it mean for me to enter that space? I think it's complicated. I was also, frankly, I had all sorts of complicated thoughts about how do I help my students and all this. I eventually did it, and I write about it, and I hesitated to, and people may object to my writing about it. I don't identify the tribe. It's anonymous. And I ended up having a quite transformative experience. It was an insight into someone else's tradition that I never would have had. And so the transformation was in my understanding. And I think that hinged on the invitation to enter that space. The chapter is actually called Shared Spaces. And all my preconceptions were wrong. All of them. However, I think it's a very delicate balance because I would never in a million years presume to then take that tradition and start doing it myself. That would just be peculiar and I think insulting
Mm-hmm.
my hosts. So I think there are boundaries. So in my own tradition, there is a prayer that's said in memory of first degree relatives. So I will say it for my father on the anniversary of his death. I don't, and this is just me, don't think it's appropriate for someone who is not in that group of the first degree relatives to get up with me and say that prayer.
Mm-hmm.
It makes it very precious and special and sacred to only say it at that time and only certain people. I didn't say it until my father died. And when I finally did, it was so powerful because I had never said it before.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the boundaries preserve something for communities, but also for individuals. The power can be lost emotionally, psychologically, religiously, spiritually, if we sort of dilute that. Now, that's a strong opinion I'm expressing. And I would be happy to debate that with people because I do think there are different views. But that's where I come down on this. I've really tried to think it through. So
I appreciate your perspective on that, and you said some really deep things just now. One of the things that I picked up on was you said it was transformative for you to be in that ritual or be in that space doing that ritual with this tribe. And so I would like to know, how has that transformation impact you since?
So it has me approaching other community rituals with more complexity. I feel like the mistake is to oversimplify. This
Mm-hmm.
is complicated. Memory is complicated. History is complicated. We should keep it as such. So when I have since then been invited into other traditions and, ranging from, a friend who has a special event at her church and she invites me to be with the congregation, um, I'm noticing so much more. I'm noticing the details of that event, say, and I'm more curious. I want to learn more about it. So the transformation is enhancing my curiosity, my awareness, my noticing, and I hope also my sense of respect. I think I always had a certain degree of respect, but now I feel like, sort of paradoxically, even as I was invited into that shared space, I now am even almost more hesitant without exploring, well, what would it mean to enter that space? So it's, I think, enhanced my awareness. It's also made me question some of the boundaries that I set around my own tradition. So I mentioned the memorial prayer. Someone could question that boundary I've set. For me individually, it's very important. Maybe for others, it's less so. And I have to explore that. So that's how I would describe it.
Thank you. You said that, or you touched on the idea that rituals sometimes fall short. Can you share a time when a ritual didn't work as expected?
Okay, yes. So I mentioned the trip in Costa Rica where wasn't able to celebrate the holiday. And so my travel companion and I, that evening, I said, well, we have to do something. We have to do something. And at the time we were out in the boondocks and I wasn't going to find the proper materials for the matzah and all that so I said, well, let's go to a restaurant and maybe we can find something and so we went to a restaurant and I ordered something, and that chapter, by the way, is called Saltines and Honey Cake. And so got some crackers and I said the blessing over it that you'd say over the matzah, the unleavened bread. And I just felt depressed. It was was just wrong. It would be like the cake that you described being like you store-bought some brownies or something, and you said, oh, there's the cake. That's my grandmother's cake. It was like, it was so, disappointing. But I have to tell you a little bit of a PS to that story, which was later that week, we were out with another group of travelers we had run into. We were traveling on our own. We were literally under the stars in this incredible place where there were not a lot of ambient lights. It wasn't a city, and we were under the stars, and we were next to a body of water. And I looked up and I thought, okay, this is good enough. This is what we have. It's saying, all right, get over yourself, Wendy. It fell short, but be in nature, be grateful for that, and another year will come around. So yeah, it fell short, and I was very snarky and complaining about it and, depressed. And I thought, get over yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one example, I would say.
If it's falling short.
Yeah.
So, there are a lot of times when we would like you were on vacation or you were traveling and you wanted to just acknowledge what was a special time for you. And one of the times that it's hard for us, that's also a hard time when you're traveling, but usually when you're traveling, you expect that you won't be able to do all the things in the certain way as rituals do imply for you. So there's another time when there's so many times when you just cannot follow through with rituals. Any suggestions on, I know that you guys did something, but what if you can't do the things that, for example, during, unrest or wartime, how do you cling on to your rituals so that you can feel like you're connected to your culture and your tradition and you're passing on what needs to be passed on? And then there's unrest or wartime. What kind of response can we as human beings do to fulfill the need to be a part of this tradition and still knowing that, it's hard?
It's hard. So you describe situations that I have been privileged and blessed not to have ever been in. But I am well aware, right now we're in the period of Ramadan, and I am well aware that there are families around the world who can't have their celebratory break the fast. Each evening there isn't food or there's an opportunity. And I read about this, and it just tears me apart. I guess I would say there's that extreme situation, unrest, wartime, other kinds of large disruptions. And then there's my very privileged, being on this 2-month trip where oh, poor me. But I was very young, so I forgive my my early 20s, so I forgive that. But what I was going to say was that, again, I think, well, is there family? Is there any community that one can share that moment with? Maybe there is, in some traditions, it would be a moment of silence. Maybe in some, it would be a prayer or a song. We still have our voices, hopefully. And I think that that's where we humans have our power. We have our voices in whatever way you want to define that. And so it might be the internal voice of repeating something, or it might be, one would hope, in community or family. And that, to me, is very powerful, to hold someone's hand and say it anyway, to say, I can't do this. It's horrible. And it's kind of like, it's called a practice for a reason. right? We do it anyway. We do
Yes.
it anyway and hope for some glimmer of something, a glimmer of something that transcends, a glimmer sometimes of sacred moments, a glimmer of humanity. And I think of the worst moments in history that one reads about, and you read about people doing this. And I can't imagine, I don't think I would have the courage to do that, but I would hope I would. But I read about them. I say, people did it anyway, maybe in secret, maybe quietly, maybe within the small circle. And that to me is where our humanity lies. That is how we maintain our humanity, maintain the legacy.
Yes.
Maybe that's the answer, the voice at that point.
I know there's a poem from Maya Angelou that says, I come as one, but I stand as 10,000. And so when you were talking, I thought of that because sometimes you can't do a ritual, or you can't break a fast, or you can't say a certain prayer, but you have the energy, you have the force of the people that came before you, and you can, like you said, say a prayer or whisper, some salutation, and know that you may be standing as one, but there are 10,000, the strength of 10,000 within.
Mm. I love that image. And I mean, her poetry does that. It provides us with that imagery that energizes what we're talking about here. By the way, I make a very little distinction between poetry and prayer and psalms. Like, to me, poetry, I have poetry
I like that.
all the time. And actually, poetry is one of the things that can become ritualized. In a sense, I have used it during difficult times. The repetition of that becomes the rereading. You learn more and more about a poem by rereading it silently or aloud, and those themselves become part of our ritual moments as well. And Maya Angelou is an example where that just lends itself so well. There are other poets I love as well, but thanks for bringing that into the conversation.
It's such a fast-paced world that we sometimes just can't slow down. We find it hard to just slow down and find meaning in the everyday. What advice do you have for someone looking to cultivate more meaningful or more mindful rituals in their life and for their family?
I guess drawing on my own experience and my observations around, I would suggest that we start with the idea of time, in the sense that, is there something every week that one could do? Maybe it's not every day, it's every week. Or maybe there's something once a month. And we've described holidays, which occur once a year. That's almost the easier thing. To start small, to very much start small. Is there a day, a week, where there is the noticing of something, the creation of a ritual around the marking of time? Time is both amazing and also a bit daunting as it's passing us by. If I can use my own example, and I'm not saying this is what everybody should do, but just for inspiration, I look to moments in nature for that. And then I said to you, I look to the sensory, the scent, the taste, the texture, the sound. And to turn that into a ritual moment is to think, well, is there a history that I can call on, the 10,000 behind me, or maybe my grandmother, to bring to that moment, to frame it in that way? And I think the marking of that time to say, okay, so every whatever that evening is or that morning is, I will do this. I will go out to the garden and notice, or my urban park here, and notice something new and reflect on that. I mean, that's to me the beginning of the creation of a new ritual, even.
Yes. I
Um,
like that. I like that idea a lot. Your background is in pediatric psychology and health humanities. Tell me, how does that influence what you write about rituals?
okay, so once in a while I put on my psychologist hat. I think that it makes me aware of this resonance across the emotional and social aspects of ritual to the meaning making and the either religious or spiritual, if you want to think of it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And it also, that psychology background, and it's something that I taught in health humanities and psychology, so they're kind of braided together, the importance of meaning making in mental health, in training in the health professions, that meaning making is a deeply human endeavor, that all your skills and all your techie stuff that you learn to be a professional or going through your daily life is not enough. So the meaning making, so the research that I'm aware of and my own experience in the professions has bolstered my commitment to this sense that to make meaning through ritual and other ways is essential to a life well lived, and also to contending with the worst that life throws at us.
I get it. Thank you. Your essays blend humor, reflection, and deep emotion. How do you balance these elements in your storytelling?
So I think it's a matter of just the writerly approach. So people have this image that you just sit there and the emotions rise and the muse lands on your shoulder and you just write it. It's basically bricklaying. So to be a little kind of objective about it, it's the emotion is there, but how do you convey that to the reader? So the balance between all of those elements that you so nicely enumerated is to look at, frankly, as a writer and an editor, the structure of it. So how does it build? Where is the humor in the first paragraph? Or is it very stark, or do you start to tell a story? So one of the stories I tell is about my nephew and his now wife getting married during the first year of the pandemic. And I start out by, in a very light way, we all got these invitations and a save the date, and it's all very light. And then very quickly, I drop us into the pandemic and how that halted all those events, and then what they did. And humor, I mean, this to me is part of the skill. It's saying, where does this come? I also read this stuff aloud to myself, hear how
Yes.
it sounds. I had a wonderful editor who said, I'm not so sure about that. So you have other readers. So I guess to me, it becomes sort of a technical question as a writer and editor, and you have your other readers to say, is this so much? So, like, my son read a couple of mine and said, Ma, that's kind of cringeworthy. So, I have my critics in house as well.
To help you balance.
The balance, exactly. That is not a spiritual matter. It's very nitty gritty. How do we do this? How do we do this?
If readers could take away just one message from your book, Milkweed and Honey Cake, what do you hope that message will be?
I'll reiterate something that has been in our conversation, which is to take the time to make life more meaningful than just the day-to-day grind,
Mm-hmm.
to take the time, even if it's only a few moments a week, to notice one's history and draw on that,
Mm.
and either revive old rituals that you wish you still had or never had, or start to create your new ones.
Thank you so much. I know you have to go, so there are three questions that I'd love to ask my guests. So before you go, what's one bold promise that you can share with the audience?
So, a promise to myself, is that what you're suggesting?
Well, a promise to the audience that, I promise that if you do this, X will happen, or I
Oh,
promise you this
oh,
will work.
I see. That's a hard one for me, Denise, 'cause I
Well, give
don't.
us a promise to yourself.
Okay, I would rather do it for myself. I don't.
I agree.
To myself, and I'm doing this in public here, is to actually enhance my ritual life a little bit every
Mm.
month. And so I would hope for that for your listeners and viewers, rather than make a promise to them that this will happen. So I would hope.
Yes. I like that. I think that I am going to start to. I've already been thinking through our conversation how to enhance rituals in my family and how to add rituals in our family. So thank you for that. What's a bold statement that you can share with the audience that will cause a paradigm shift?
Okay, so bold statement: question the boundaries. Question
Mm.
them in the sense that, have you been assuming there's no boundary between you and other ritual communities, or have your boundaries been too rigid?
Ooh,
So
that's
I'm going to throw that out there for people to wrestle with.
yes. I love that. Thought provoking. I love it. What is a bold move that you would like to make in the future?
Okay, so if I can shift away from ritual, the bold move is to get back to my next project
Mhm.
and continue it. It's only partly done because I've been doing all these lovely podcasts and interviews and book talks and social media. I'm frowning. So my bold move is get back to my desk daily and
Ooh,
be working again, because that's what I usually do. That's my bold move.
what will be the
Back
reward for doing
to
it
the
daily?
chair and sit there and work on the next project.
So, what will be your reward for doing it daily? Because if you're going to give yourself such a rigorous task of doing it daily, you need to reward yourself,
The
right?
reward actually is intrinsic, Denise. I
Ah,
love words, I love writing, and I know once I get back to it, I will be happier day to day.
words are powerful. Wendy, this has been such a rich and insightful conversation. Thank you for
Thank
coming
you.
and for sharing your wisdom with us. And you're a beautiful soul. I can feel it. And I appreciate all that you've just bestowed upon us. Please tell the audience where they can follow you and get more
Okay.
of all of that, what you just gave us.
So I have a website, and I'm sure you'll share the spelling of my name eventually. It's wendyhorwitzauthor.com, and you can find out more about me. You can get in touch, and you can also find the book via that website, wendyhorwitzauthor, all one word.com. And I'd love to hear from people. I really would.
Guys, listen, it's Horwitz. That's the last name, Horwitz. So jot it down, make sure you follow her. She has given us a lot of insights to take away to add to our daily lives, or maybe to, you know, add a ritual to something. Maybe a family member is being born, maybe, something you can do when, I don't know. Think about it for yourself. But I've been thinking a lot while we're having this conversation. I'm like, how can I incorporate rituals into our lives to do more? I'm sure if I start to take stock, I'll see more. But I just love the idea that rituals help us to anchor our lives, making the ordinary extraordinary. Your book, Milkweed and Honey Cake, reminds us to pause, reflect, and embrace the sacred in the small things. Thank you so much again. Listeners, if you want to dive deeper into Wendy's beautiful storytelling, please grab your copy of Milkweed and Honey Cake. And if there's anyone out there that would like to write a book and don't know where to start, please visit boldpublishings.com or send me an email at authordnicholson@gmail.com. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us for the Bold Book of the Day with Dr. Denise Nicholson, a central hub and a safe space for authors to share their stories. Follow Dr. Denise on Facebook and Instagram at Denise Nicholson, or go to denisenicholson.com. Remember, no one can share your story better than you.